Chapter 5. Mum wasn't home. I sighed in relief. April took off her shoes and stood awkwardly in the hallway while Dad offered us a choice of drinks. Iced tea, cola, lemonade, orangeade. The list went on and on. I never usually had so many options. April chose iced tea. I could hear Mum's voice yelling in my head about evil sugar, so I chose water. As soon as we'd finished our drinks, I whisked April upstairs. I was about to open the door to my room when I had a sudden panic. Had I left it in a mess? I tried to remember. I hope there's no dirty washing on the floor, I thought. Trying to stay calm, I opened the door and led April inside. She looked around at the grey walls and black furniture, then down at the floorboards, which were also painted grey. "Wow," she said. "What?" I asked, scanning the room for anything embarrassing. Thankfully, everything was tidy. "You really don't like colour, do you?" she said. "I've never seen so much grey." She walked over to the window and gazed out at the street. My heart leapt into my throat. Next to her, on top of the chest of drawers, was my hunting stake, an ironwood stake I'd carved and sharpened myself. The length of a pencil, it was as thick as a broomstick and had an ultra-sharp point at one end. It was a weapon for fighting vampires, and definitely not something a 10-year-old was meant to have in their room. What was I going to do? While she wasn't looking, I crept over to the stake and picked it up. But before I could put it away, she turned around. Quickly, I hid the weapon behind my back. "You've never liked girly things," she said. "You must think my room is a nightmare." "Well, your room does sort of look like a unicorn's vomited everywhere," I replied jokingly. She giggled. I held tightly to the stake. "Seriously though, your room suits you. It's bright and cheerful, just like you, and it's full of books. You know, because you're a nerd." She flicked me in the chest. "There's nothing wrong with being a nerd," she said defensively. "And books are great. Crime thrillers and murder mysteries are the best." I gestured around at my room. "Well, as you can see, there are no books in this room." I said it in a humorous voice, but my face flushed. I didn't want to talk about my difficulty reading, my low reading scores, especially not that I was given extra help in lessons. These things had never bothered me much when I was younger, but now it felt embarrassing. Mum didn't understand the problem. Apparently, reading wasn't as important as learning to fight or being able to whittle a steak. Maybe she was right, but her opinion hadn't done me any favours at school. "Can I sit down?" April asked, changing the subject. "Of course," I replied. Keeping my hands behind my back, I sat beside her on the bed. Sneakily, I slid the stake under the covers. My heart rate started to slow down. That was close. "Do you remember when we were in Year 1? She asked. "You kept fighting with the boys in class and getting sent to the head teacher." I'd forgotten about that. The teachers thought I was a menace. They'd had to call in my parents. "And then in Year 2, April said, "one of the boys stole your pencil. You went so red and you were shaking. I knew you were going to attack him, and I didn't want you to get in trouble. Do you remember?" "You gave me your pencil instead," I replied. and I calmed down. "That's when we became friends," she said. "No, it was before that," I told her. "Lucy wouldn't let you be the princess in the dressing up area, so I ripped the dress off her and gave it to you." "I forgot about that," April said, laughing. "The dress was so ripped, I couldn't wear it. I cried because it was ruined." I laughed with her, and we tried to remember other funny stories. We talked about our memories until Dad called us down for dinner. Mum was there. She greeted April with a tight smile. She didn't say much during dinner, but Dad was chatty, so it wasn't too awkward. When it was time for her to leave, April picked up her bag from the hall and slipped on her shoes. As she tied her laces, her ring glittered in the light from the open door. The sun was setting, and it had bathed the hallway in an orange glow. My parents were in the kitchen, talking in sharp but quiet voices. They were arguing. April pretended she couldn't hear them. "Are you going to tell me about the ring?" I asked her. It took her a while to reply. "Grandma gave it to me," she said finally. I could tell there was more to it. "April, what is it?" "It's just... You know when I said Grandma has been acting stranger than usual? Well, she thinks..." "What?" I pressed. "When I was little, she used to read me stories about fairies and witches and vampires, except she always said they weren't just stories. She thought they were true, that magic was real." My eyes widened. "I know, it's insane," April said. "But recently, she's been saying her friend Helen's death wasn't natural. She thinks it was to do with magic. She told me she's a witch, and I'm a witch too." "You're a witch?" I asked skeptically. I knew vampires existed, but I'd never heard Mum mention witches before. It was just an old folk tale that witches had once lived in Brightwood. No one actually thought it was true. April lifted her hand to show me the ring. "Grandma made me wear this. She says I'm nearly 11, so I'll be getting my powers soon. The ring is meant to help me understand them. She made me try on about 10 different rings until she decided this one was right." I couldn't help it. My lips curved into a smile. "It's not funny," April said, whacking me lightly on the arm. Then April's grandma pulled up outside the house in her dilapidated car. "You think Gran's mad?" April said. "Only a little," I replied, trying to fight the smile. She sighed before saying a quick goodbye and then jogging across the front lawn. "Don't cast any spells," I called out. She poked her tongue out at me and got into the car. When April's grandma drove off, the engine growled like it was in pain. Behind me, my parents continued to argue, and so I slipped upstairs to my room. Chapter 6. The next day, I was late for school. I hadn't slept very well. Mum and Dad had spent most of the night arguing, and I knew it was because I'd invited April over. Mum made me get up early to do extra training, and I bruised my arm falling over during our stick battle. "Get up," she'd ordered. "Vampires heal quickly. They won't give you a rest. You need to ignore the pain and keep fighting." I'd sprung to my feet and attacked her with my battle stick. At the end of our fight, she'd thrown me a towel and crossed her arms. "A 30-year-old vampire might have trouble against you," she said. "They are young and their strength hasn't come yet. But a vampire in their hundreds, you'd be dead in less than a minute." "I don't have my powers yet," I said. "I'm not a full hunter." "I know," she replied quietly. "That's what I'm worried about." When I walked into class, everyone else was already sitting down. Miss Gravel smiled as I made my way over to my seat. "Are you all right?" April asked in a whisper. "You look like you haven't slept." I opened my mouth to reply, but I didn't know what to say. I couldn't tell her the truth. She started fiddling nervously with the yellow ring on her finger. "I need to talk to you," she said. "I'm worried about—" But before she could finish her sentence, Miss Gravel cleared her throat. "Good morning, class," she said. "As you know, we have a new boy starting today." She gestured towards a student sitting in the front row. I hadn't noticed him before. He stood up, and Miss Gravel led him to the front of the class. The moment he turned around, my heart skipped a beat. His hair was black, his skin was pale, his lips were red, and, when he smiled, his teeth were pure white. What really caught my eye, however, were his black sunglasses. My hands gripped the desk. "This is Vladimir Knox," Miss Gravel said. "Is he?" I thought in a panic. No, he can't be." He was wearing a cardigan, black without a school logo on it, even though it was a hot day, and he had a white shirt on with a purple bow tie. His outfit was old-fashioned, like he'd been dressed by a grandma, or by someone very old. Vampires lived for hundreds of years. Fearfully, I tried to remember everything Mum had told me about how to spot a vampire. 1. Eyes. Vampires always had really big pupils. That meant they couldn't see very well in bright light. He's wearing sunglasses. Indoors. 2. Teeth. Vampires' teeth never got stained or damaged, so they were usually extremely white and perfectly even. Okay, so he has sunglasses on and perfectly white teeth. That doesn't mean he's a vampire. 3. Skin. The skin of a vampire was always pale because the sun was painful to them. Their skin was also colder than a human's. Well, he's definitely pale, but maybe he plays video games in his room all day and doesn't go out much. 4. Smell. Most vampires smelled strongly of either garlic, cabbage, sewage, or blood. I can't smell him from here. I was going to have to get closer. I also needed to check his nails. Vampires' nails didn't have white tips at the end like human nails. "He seems nice," April whispered in my ear. "It takes a lot of courage to wear a bow tie on the first day of school, especially a purple one." Around the classroom, I could see other people whispering and giggling. I guessed the vampire boy did look a bit odd with that purple bow tie. I just hoped he wouldn't see people laughing and take his revenge by drinking everyone's blood. "Does anyone have a question for Vladimir?" Miss Gravel asked the class. Sophie Edwards put up her hand. "Why are you wearing sunglasses?" she asked with a nasty smirk. Vladimir's voice was quiet and nervous. I'm sensitive to the light," he said. "You look weird," shouted Laurie Pullman. Vladimir's pale cheeks turned pink. "He's going to get angry and kill us all," I thought. Miss Gravel sent him back to his seat and started the lesson, but I couldn't concentrate. My eyes were fixed on the back of Vladimir's head. "A vampire," I thought. "There's a vampire in my class."